Today I have a science curriculum for you called Building Foundations of Scientific Understanding. These books go through for K through 8, and this one book covers grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. This is a very cheap science curriculum. Well, not cheap as in not useful, but cheap as in inexpensive. But it's also not going to be very open and go. So let me start with the table of contents. This is supposed to be aligned to the next generation science standards, if I remember right. And it goes into pretty good depth on it. If you go through this curriculum, your kids will have probably a very good understanding of science. So here's the introduction and preface. The introduction and preface is this thick. It goes through a whole bunch of, they call them orientations, on how to use this book. Because it is not scripted and you just do this and it's well laid out and it's like, open here, here's lesson 1, say this, child does this, say this. That's not this curriculum at all. In fact, it doesn't even really give you a very clear order. So the idea of it is, with the flow chart, which goes on 2 pages, there are 4 strands of science: nature and matter, life science, physical science, engineering and technology, earth and space science. So as you go through, you're supposed to kind of go, you'll do lesson 8, progression A-B, lesson 1, organizing things into categories, and then you can go A2 or you can go to B2. You kind of are supposed to work your way across, maybe go down a little, back up, where you're kind of working back and forth, doing lessons as you feel make sense to you, kind of switching things up. But let me see if I can find one. Some of them have prerequisites. So, for example, it's saying for lesson A8, you're going to want to do lesson A8 and D4 kind of right by each other. You want to do lesson C1 before you do lesson B3. So it kind of introduces it as a flow chart, but you kind of go in the order that works best for your family. So I'll give you an example of a lesson. Because of how this is set up, I can't really do a beginning, a middle, and an end lesson because it just depends on which order you go through things. So here, we'll do lesson A6. Each one gives you kind of an overview of what it's going to talk about and introduce. It tells you the time required for all the different parts. And then practices would be kind of like the objective students who demonstrate understanding can. Like that. These are still the objectives. Required background. This is what you have to have done before you do this lesson. These are the materials you need for part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. It encourages you to use teachable moments. And then here is kind of the actual lesson breakdown for part 1. Compressing air and air pressure. And you're probably going to have to read this before you do it with your child and get an idea of what you want to do. A lot of times there are demonstrations in there. It uses Socratic discussions to make the kids kind of realize stuff on their own instead of dictating it to them. Which is why you can't really call it scripted. They'll give you some ideas of questions to ask. But then it's just a matter of getting your kid to come to the conclusion kind of on their own with guiding questions and questioning them and stuff like that. There are some really cool demonstrations and experiments in here. But like all that I just went through, you would probably read ahead of time and kind of think of how you want to approach it with your child. And then these are kind of like extra stuff, like questions, discussion, activities to review, reinforce, expand, and assess learning. So you can have it kind of builds on the lesson and stuff that the child can then do. And then if this were used in the classroom, you could send this kind of stuff home for them to do at home. You're already home, so you can choose to do some of this stuff. We usually didn't, but we would usually pick a couple of books for correlated reading. You know, experiments with air and just kind of stuff to expand. Sometimes I would do the books for correlated reading first. And that is a lesson in this. So it's something that takes a lot more planning than a lot of stuff. Since I'm having a baby this year, we will not be using this. This year we are going to do something that I'm hoping is going to be a little bit more scripted and easier to use. But it is a very solid science curriculum. And given this is like K through 2, I think it's less than $30. You get 3 years worth of science stuff, and it is super thick. And then towards the back of the book, you also have resources and appendices. So it gives you everything you need, except for, of course, things for the experiments and demonstrations and all that, and the extra books. But it'll give your kids a really solid understanding of science if you work through this program.